What would you do if you were part of an elite group tasked with spying, sabotaging, and generally making life hell for the Japanese Empire during World War II? Would you focus on gathering intel, run spy networks through Japanese held territory, train the local populace in tactics of guerrilla warfare? You could do all that, but wouldn't it be more fun to weaponize fox demons? Hello, I'm Candi. I collect bones, bullets, and bad decisions from history, and welcome to my cabinet of curiosities. Today's centerpiece focuses on my fox and one of the most unhinged plans the OSS has ever had during World War II. I present to you Operation Fantasia. The plan was originally hatched by a fellow named Ed Salinger. Ed was a prominent figure in international trade, living in Tokyo before the war, and because he was fluent in Japanese and so enveloped by their culture, the Office of Strategic Service, or OSS, which is the pre-CIA CIA, thought that he was the perfect man to help them defeat their foe. The mode of morale destruction? Kitsune.
Delphox use SMG attack.
Kitsune is a supernatural fox-shaped spirit that, at least from the Americans' perspective, was a portent of doom. It's actually way more complex than that, but that's what the OSS was going with. Salinger wrote in a memo, "The foundation for the proposal rests upon the fact that the modern Japanese is subject to superstitions, beliefs in evil spirits, and unnatural manifestations which can be provoked and stimulated." That's like everyone, right? I mean, like everyone's like that. Anywho, once they got the basic idea of what they were going to do, the conundrum now was how to attack with the Delphox. The kitsune. The OSS planners had a ton of ideas on how to weaponize this superstition. Not all of them were bangers, though. One idea was fox-shaped balloons that would fly over the villages and totally wig the people out. I don't know how that could possibly be as effective as they probably thought it was. If I saw something flying over our town, I'd probably just look up and just be like, that's something all right, I guess, and just go about my business. Okay, so that's scrapped. Another proposal was to use fox whistles. Salinger wrote, "These whistles can be used in combat, and a sufficient number of these should create an eerie sound of the kind calculated to meet the Japanese superstition." Sounds kind of okay. It'd be like one of those Aztec death whistles screeching from the depths of the dark woods. Have you ever heard what a fox sounds like? It's actually kind of creepy. But they didn't really like that plan, so they skipped it. The next idea was straight out of the R. Kelly playbook. Yeah, you know what I mean. To be fair, I don't think that they were thinking of people pee. They were going to spray fox urine from above with the intended purpose of, well, making it smell like demon foxes were afoot. They didn't go for it, though. They probably told whoever came up with that one that they were in charge of collecting the gallons of pee, and he was just like, nah, I'm good. Okay, so how about this? What if Japanese citizens sympathetic to the US became possessed by the fox spirit and act like complete lunatics? Salinger said, "There are many difficulties which would have to be overcome before the plan could be put into actual operation." Yeah, no kidding. So that probably wouldn't work. All right, here's another one. How about making a stuffed glowing robot fox with a human skull attached to its head and float that over the Japanese? Now, as metal as that sounds, that was also met with a resounding no. They continued to put their weird heads together and finally came up with a plan that was a little bit more to their liking. Capturing live foxes, dousing them in glow-in-the-dark paint, and yeeting them at the enemy. Yeah, that's the plan that they heard, and they were like,
"Brilliant! Brilliant!"
First step, they needed the paint. You obviously can't just have foxes scattering through the woods without some kind of ethereal glow about them. So the OSS approached the US Radium Corporation. They had designed a glow-in-the-dark paint called Undark. They used it on planes, watches, compasses, weapon sights, all kinds of stuff. What made it actually glow in the dark, though? Radioactive radium. Have you ever heard of the Radium Girls? Where several women working for that very company, painting radioactive luminous paint on watches and gauges, developed what's known as radium jaw in the 1920s? I don't recommend Googling it, unless if you're into that kind of thing. You disgust me. Still knowing all that, the OSS looked at it and said, yep, I'm gonna put that on a fox. Now that they had the perfect paint, it was time to make it stick. To test out its stickability on the animal's fur, they approached Harry Nymphaeus from the Central Park Zoo. For whatever reason, he chose to not test it on a fox, but instead went with a very unlucky raccoon. Once he was separated from the public eye, they bribed him with food and painted him a glowing blue-green. No word on how the raccoon fared later on. It's probably okay. They then acquired some foxes and enough radium paint to melt the jaws of the entire Japanese Empire, and now was the most pressing question that they had to solve. Will it actually scare people? Imagine this. It's 1945, you're on a date taking a lovely little stroll through Washington, D.C.'s Rock Creek Park, arm in arm, enjoying the company in the warm summer night, when all of a sudden, streaks of green catch your eye. Through the trees, your eye catches something ghostly. Then suddenly, a glowing chupacabra-looking freak of nature runs out of the woods and right towards you. Yeah, this really happened. One guy was so freaked out, he called the National Park Police. They reported, "Horrified citizens, shocked by the sudden sight of the leaping ghost-like animals, fled from the dark recesses of the park with the screaming genies." Yep, the OSS released 30 radioactive foxes in a park on unsuspecting Americans a mere 5 minutes away from the White House, just to see what would happen. And they were pretty happy with the results. If Americans freaked out, the Japanese were sure to wet their pants. I wonder if they ever got those foxes back. Are they still out there, roaming the streets of DC? Okay, so now we have the foxes that can glow in the dark. And we definitely know that they will freak people out. But how do we get them to Japan? The vet, Nymphaeus, God, that's a crazy name. It's like a Marvel superhero, or a villain in this case. Anyway, Nymphaeus told the OSS that foxes could swim ashore if they dropped them off in the ocean. So the team said, yeah, we'll see about that. To test out his theory, they took captured foxes, painted them, and took them out for a little boat ride out into the middle of the Chesapeake Bay, where they then chucked them over the side of the boat and waited to see what would happen. To their relief, the foxes actually swam all the way to the shore, safe and sound. However, the water washed off most of the paint and the foxes licked the rest off when they got to shore. So technically, the vet was right, but, just didn't work out the way that they had hoped. But that's fine. They figured they'll just have to drop them off on the shoreline. No problem. But there's another issue. Foxes have a tendency to not follow instructions very well. I mean, what do you expect? They're wild animals. You can't just drop them off like you're taking your kid to school, wave at them, and go,
Have fun storming the castle.
Think it'll work?
It would take a miracle.
Bye-bye.
What happens if they get scared and run in the wrong direction? What happens if they completely avoid people, which animals typically do? Their solution? A metric ton of foxes. If enough foxes are released, some will get through. Yeah, no kidding. When in doubt, just spray and pray, right? Which was actually the backup plan. Spray, paint, everyone.
Everyone!
Minks, muskrats, raccoons, coyotes, anything will do. I mean, we seriously didn't have to just go with the foxes. Yeah, Japanese culture and superstitions and blah, blah, blah. But could you imagine any glowing animal running right at you? You'd lose your freaking mind. A radioactive squirrel bouncing down the road would be enough to make me go, nope, that's it, I'm out. Hell, the radiation is enough of a factor for this to have been a fairly successful operation. Never mind the folklore, the mere fact that every other animal in their vicinity was shedding deadly radioactive material would have been enough to at least deter some of their soldiers or make them sick enough to put them out of the fight. So, how well did Operation Fantasia work? It didn't. The head of the Research and Development Branch of the OSS, also referred to as the Department of Dirty Tricks, was a guy named Stanley Lavelle. He was basically Q from James Bond movies. Super smart, inventive, and involved in a ton of crazy schemes, like truth serums, bat bombs, and spiking Hitler's food with estrogen to make his mustache fall out. So you'd think he'd be gung-ho about radioactive foxes, right? Well, Lovell took one look at the files and plans for Operation Fantasia and said, "I trust that this will serve as a critique to us in the field of pure reason. For you and me, that's smart people talk, for we have lost our friggin' minds." The minutes of another OSS meeting near the end of the war had concluded. This problem of Fantasia has been mercifully completed. They scrapped it before it could even be implemented. They basically shook their heads at the folly of how far something so deeply weird and stupid could go. So guys, the next time someone suggests to you that you need to outfox your opponent, don't take it quite so literally. You don't need to pee on them, whistle at them, or make their animals radioactive. Just blow them up with atomic bombs instead. Sorry, Japanese Twitter, I won't make any more of those jokes. Love you! That's it from the cabinet. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more of my content, please press the like and subscribe buttons. And as always, stay weird and tell your dog I said hi! I think I just broke my cotton. Are you okay? I think it's okay.